Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to our human performance webinars. Today, we're joined by Dr. Marcus Colby. My name is James Grigson, and we're looking at best practices for internal and external load management inside of your athlete management system. Today, we'll be looking at the Smartabase athlete management system, but some of the principles that Marcus is going to be talking about today can be used inside of your own athlete management system, however you may choose. Marcus, I can see you having some problems with your video, mate. I'm going to sort you out in just a second. I had some issues before we started. For those, I'm really excited about this one today. I can't wait to get in, but just a few housekeeping. For those joining us on the webinar live, thank you for joining. We really appreciate your support. There is a chat functionality down the bottom or on your right-hand side of the screen that's going to allow you to either Q&A or chat with us. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. We're happy to pause and address some of those questions during the presentation, and we'll also look to have some Q&A time at the very end as well. So if you're banking up some questions, we're going to have some Q&A time at the end. So please feel free to use that functionality. For those that are new to this webinar format, we really treat this just as an overview of some of the features and functionalities that we have, and we choose different topics. We don't go deep dark and into the back end of the system. That's more for our consultants in a one-on-one time environment. But we found that these webinars have been very helpful to strike up some ideas, particularly because we're leaning on our consultants to deliver these presentations, and they see people from all walks of life, military, performing arts, professional sports in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere. So they see a lot of different practices in how people like to visualize and use their data. So we're seeing a lot of traction and people really enjoying these webinars from what we've heard. Speaking of what we've heard, we'd love for you to use the survey after this. There'll be a survey that'll be emailed to you. Please feel free to put any suggestions for future topics, any constructive criticism or things that you liked in that survey. We really, really appreciate all the feedback that we've got. And if you're watching this post-production and you're on YouTube, please feel free to use the comment section below to ask questions or to suggest topics for webinars in weeks to come. So without further ado, I just wanted to introduce Dr. Marcus Colby. He's going to give a brief introduction into himself, and then I'll let him work his magic.
Perfect. Thank you, James. I'll see if I can get my video going, but if not, that is not a problem. Let's see. We'll see how that goes. Regardless, I'd just like to say thank you for everyone attending today. Obviously, to jump off the back of James's comments and I guess myself and where I've come through in this journey. Just to give you some background, I think it's important in this space in terms of how we look at internal and external load. It can differ greatly depending on the type of environment you're in, whether that's sporting, military, the arts, or depending on even the sports that you've worked with. So in terms of my kind of, I guess, journey to date, I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to work with a number of different organisations. I kind of started out with the Australian Football League, working within that system. Very fortunate to spend almost 6 or 7 years with the West Coast Eagles, doing my kind of research streams and eventually my PhD there, looking at this kind of injury risk paradigm or approach. And then from there, I've been with Fusion for almost 4 years now, in the last 2 years out in the US, which we know is a different culture and a different approach to sports science and the monitoring space. So that's been a really exciting and an eye-opening experience in terms of the different approaches I've kind of been exposed to. So excited to share some stories around what that journey's been like and the different approaches, I guess, I take with my bias in this space, and also share how we kind of configure our platform to really optimize this type of load management, load monitoring process with our clientele. I'm so excited to kind of share that journey. I guess just to kind of kick off the webinar and give some background to how the system is kind of configured and what that looks like. We obviously do work with a number of, I guess, vendor partners in the way that we bring in load information to the platform. So we do have a very comprehensive suite of integrations, and that allows for that really seamless passive and I guess that hands-free kind of import of information into a central system. So that integration kind of option allows you to bring multiple data streams together, and we see that as kind of a critical point to monitoring your athletes from both that external load perspective, whether that's a GPS, say a Catapult or a VX Sport or a Stat Sport, whatever that may be, to your internal load measurements from say any of the heart rate monitoring systems available on the market, and using our own internal tools as well in terms of our mobile application and what that looks like as well. So a really kind of versatile suite to bring that information together and give you the power to really configure things that work with your philosophies and how you'd approach this space. I guess to dive a little bit further into the kind of mobile data collection side of things, we've had really exciting kind of developments in this space in terms of accessibility and efficiency for your athletes to kind of self-report. There's lots of, I guess, research and discussion that a self-report value in this kind of load monitoring space could be deemed an internal load measure, being somewhat subjective, and I won't go into the ins and outs of that, but yeah, it can still be a really useful measure for bringing that in tandem with some of your technologies and external load devices. So a quick example here of just the mobile application and how that's quickly captured. So taking the simple kind of rated perceived exertion here with the duration, we're able to get that arbitrary unit of load that again we could deem as an internal load measure, to then combine with our other data streams and have a better informed process. And I'll talk more to that as we go along in terms of how this can be useful for determining any disjoints in an athlete's response to your program, which we think is a really valuable process. I guess the other really interesting space and something that we are exposed to consistently across all our clientele, and like I said, very fortunate to see different philosophies in different regions and cultures over the times, but also just individual philosophies around how do we calculate internal and external load. We do, again, we're lucky to have a really deep calculation capability within the platform. We've got over 70 field types in terms of the type of data you can collect and the type of calculations you're really able to run on that. So to I guess name a few that we'll explore today in terms of this webinar, your acute to chronics and looking at those acute versus chronic windows and determining a ratio of kind of, I guess, based off that concept of fatigue and the fitness model. I'm sure we've all read a little bit around Bannister's models in that respect. All the recent variations, as the researchers showed, being exponentially weighted to uncoupled, whatever that may be, to be different windows depending on your sport, your fixture. There's lots of confounding or other covariates when we look at these types of variables. Lots of debate, which is always fun as we get involved in it. Exponentially weighted within the system, something that we have explored a lot with clients as well, looking at week-to-week changes. Simple Z-scores as well. So a Z-score, for those that haven't dug into it too much, looks at, say, today's session as an example compared to the standard deviation of that athlete's average or typical load, and determines if they're within or outside of, let's say, a typical deviation for that individual over time. So a really kind of, simple concept looking at how they compare to their average. As an extension of that, and something that I have seen a lot of use in the past, say, year or two, and just given the debates around acute to chronic, is then converting that Z-score to a STEN score, so a standard 10 score, which puts it on that 1 to 10 scale. And The reasons for that, for those that have kind of dug into Z-scores and seen how that scale kind of sits, is we go from taking it to be, say, negative and positive values to something that's maybe a little bit more interpretable on a 1 to 10 scale. So some cool examples that we'll show you today in terms of how we've actually used that to kind of better inform and easily translate to our audience as well. Finally, there is the possibilities to kind of connect into kind of R and Python and have these deeper analytical packages or statistical packages if that is something that you're looking to do with your AMS. Essentially, most of our standard calculations within the system, if it can be done in Excel, it can typically be done in Smartabase as well. Before I kind of move into the platform and just speak to the actual visualization standpoint, which is going to be kind of a primary focus for today's webinar in terms of how can we take these two internal and external data streams and make them meaningful, make them actionable. One other really big feature of the platform, and I think something that's critical across every system, every process around this theme is alerts, and knowing when to look at your information, when to dig a little bit deeper compared to just say a session report or just a standard kind of one pager. So a feature within our platform involves these performance alerts, and it essentially can help with you kind of not having to fish for the information or the data that you need to see, and actually encourage your coaches to only arrive in the platform when they need to. So they're not feeling like they're just scrolling through reports. An example here, we've got, say, our mobile applications where we can get push notifications if a certain player is flagged above their average or significantly above their average workload in any given session. And we also receive or can configure email alerts as well in terms of that same concept with, say, a quick PDF of where they're currently at, or directly link through to the platform to then review that information accordingly and contextualize it in terms of what it actually means for the individual and their subsequent program. Great. So I'm just going to flick now across to the actual platform itself. So for this example here, I kind of want to just take you through my kind of mental model or philosophy and kind of process around data visualization when we're looking at, say, a workload monitoring report. I guess our common goal as practitioners in this space is to save time, to be more efficient, to automate those high performance questions we have on a daily, a weekly, a monthly, a seasonal basis, and really configure these in a way that suits us as maybe the scientists, but also our audience as well. So whether that's your coaches, your medical staff, whoever that may be, that really is going to determine the complexity of these reports and how we want these to look. With these as well, on top of that, we're essentially trying to tell a story with this visualization to influence the program in an actionable way. We don't want to just present the data as a simple kind of replication of what the session elicited. We want to know what that means in reference to where we've come from with this athlete and where we're going to go tomorrow, or say leading into a final series or a championship, whatever that may be. And then I guess in terms of the audience, to kind of start with this report, we've got a lot of coaches and practitioners all over the world that just want very simple information. They want that alert. They want to land in the platform and see the most recent flags, and then they want to be out of the AMS, and they want to be interacting with the athletes and actually having those discussions. So the very kind of simple layout I've got here is for those practitioners that just want to get in and out. I've just got my most recent flags. I've kind of put a goal across each of these visuals to kind of give you some context there. And we're looking at whether we can identify the highest risk scenarios or athletes in the highest risk scenario. So examples here, we might have a higher workload than normal. This is using that Z score converted to a STEN here, as you can see. to identify if someone's above their average or significantly above their average load. So I can quickly maybe interact with that player and actually have them do an additional recovery session or get in some additional warm-up drills during that next session. I could have some recovery related or even internal response metrics coming through from my various wearable devices, or even a self-report questionnaire via our mobile application, identify if there's any players that potentially haven't got that adequate recovery that we want throughout the program. Again, very simple heuristics for our coaches and our practitioners to interpret. Finally, maybe we're looking at whether they're not hydrated enough, whether that's coming from, again, self-report questionnaires or different kind of hydration testing technologies. So something to keep in mind. So again, this would be kind of my first landing page. I would have built this out as maybe my kind of heuristics or my profile of where my players are at. And then I could potentially go off and I'll be straight into interacting with the athletes and ensuring that I'm actually actioning on this information. I guess as I dig a little bit deeper in terms of maybe a sessional report for some stage. So this could be coming direct from our GPS integration, for example, with the goal of kind of reviewing today's session, identifying any players of focus for subsequent sessions and planning. I've just done a really simple example here of, say, comparing their external load, being the load that we've prescribed on the body, I guess. And that can be, say, I need you to run 6 kilometers today, 10 kilometers today, and then looking at their actual internal response. So what's their heart rate doing in terms of what we've elicited in the program. Here we're doing some really simple kind of calculations using just a Z-score compared to their, say, seasonal average or, say, training session average, however we do want to configure that. And what we're actually looking for here is to ensure that we're either seeing the response that we wanted. It's not necessarily that a high, say, external load or total distance increase and an average or a low heart rate is a bad thing. That can probably indicate that they're potentially fit and really maintaining their program. But we are looking for certain scenarios contextually, depending on the individual, that might indicate that they've got, say, a low, say, output compared to normal, but they've responded somewhat poorly compared to their typical, say, heart rate in these sessions. So potentially this can be our indicator of fatigue. And again, this is all contextual to where that individual's at with the program and what we wanted to see in a given session as well. So again, just a really quick kind of comparison there to better inform on the program. The next question I'm often asking when I'm working through with our clientele and with various organizations is where did the players come from in terms of their load over the program, both internally and externally, and being able to identify both individual and squad trends to determine if they're actually progressing as expected. Very simple kind of visuals here of where we're at currently in terms of the current session, or this could be a rolling window of some sort, again, depending on your fixture, your schedule, how you train. What does this typically look like compared to a similar session, an average of some sort? And then I've just got a really basic display of, do they sit within their standard 10 score? So just a recap there, this is converting a Z-score to a 1 to 10 scale. Typically, with the way it's calculated, and you can adjust it depending on your kind of philosophy around what's a meaningful change in terms of standard deviation. But typically 5.5 sits as they're on par with exactly their average. So you can see here we're slightly lower than their average in this given session, and potentially how it's been tagged. And there's some really great papers. One that I'd recommend reading, Heidi Thornton, Jay Stellani and co. Wrote a really good summary of athlete monitoring systems and the different analysis and visualization approaches in this space. But you can look, and I know there's lots of debate around this as well, about having some discrete ranges in terms of what you see as optimal, say a low load compared to their individual average, a high, and then a very high as well. So a quick snapshot there. Within the platform, obviously everything here is very dynamic in terms of how I can look at certain periods throughout the season, whether that be looking at maybe leading into the restart of seasons and what the loads have looked like there, after breaks, coming off seasons, whatever that may be. I can get really specific in terms of how I'm trying to analyze this information and dig down to those specific kind of times of season. Everything throughout the visualizations here are interactive as well, which is really great in terms of being able to see and click through and actually identify what individuals had responded in I guess what way in terms of this information. So a really kind of nice way to have the general kind of group view, and then be able to click through and determine if someone is kind of creeping that average up or whatever that may be. I guess in terms of exploring a little bit deeper, and something that we're really starting to expand on with our athletes and our different organizations and their respective athletes, is looking at the internal to external workload relationship a little bit further, and looking at better ways that we can potentially visualize that information to paint the picture, tell the story for the coach, and hopefully influence the program in a positive way. So here, this example, as I spoke to before with the Z scores, we're looking at identifying players that may not be responding as expected to the external load that we've provided or we've prescribed, sorry. And what we're trying to identify here is maybe these players in this bottom right quadrant. The way that we've set this up, we've got just absolute variables for the sake of this example, so session RPE and total running distance. And we're looking to identify any players that may be, say, running a low distance or a low external load, but having a high internal load. We're using session RPE as that measure here. This is, I guess, one of the really great uses of the platform in that respect, is looking at these kind of multifactorial approaches. And we've configured this table to flag people, and all our clients have the accessibility to do this themselves. Flag anyone that has met these two scenarios, and this could be more than two scenarios as well in terms of your philosophies and also through our kind of consultation as well. Finally, just for the sake of showing the capabilities and also hopefully some healthy discussions, we obviously use the acute to chronic workload with a number of clients still. Lots of debate, lots of healthy debate, I think, in my opinion, in terms of how it's used. But we still see this as a really good way of showing in a simplistic way, or starting a conversation with a coach, that the players had an increase in their workload in, say, an acute window, maybe the last 7 days or 3 days or 5, whatever is best defined for your sport and demands, compared to that longer chronic window in terms of, say, the last 28 days or 20 or 21, whatever that may be. So again, just a few examples in terms of how these charts can be displayed, and this can be overlaid obviously with other metrics, and you can look at your, say, external acute to chronic versus your internal acute to chronic, to really see if their loads are kind of progressing as expected over time, and use that as kind of an informative training tool in terms of where you want to be at certain stages of your competitive season. So it's a quick example there. I guess in the sake of time, this is probably just a quick overview of how we've laid out these reports, kind of using our best practice expertise, and hopefully some good discussion points in terms of this webinar and the follow-up webinars we'll be looking at in this monitoring space, especially given the times. I will hand back to you, James. Thank you.
Awesome, Marcus. Thank you, mate. If you can leave that dashboard up, that would be fantastic. For everybody, again, the bottom right-hand corner or the right-hand side, there's a Q&A functionality and chat functionality. I'm going to kick it off with some questions to Marcus myself. Mate, thanks for taking the time to go through this. It's really informative. I think just kind of as a recap, I love the way that you've broken it down in terms of what's going to be most important to your key stakeholders. So, you know, at the top, you've mentioned your coaches in this example are your key stakeholders. They're the people that want to know just that snapshot information, get in and then get out. But then you've gone about layering, as you scroll down, the information where you're more, your people that are being more astute to this information can dig a little bit deeper and understand why those flags occurred from a sessional perspective, or even as you go down to that STEM visualization as to, you know, where they came from. When you speak normally in a pretty nonchalant way, but this is definitely not a nonchalant presentation. This is very well done from my perspective. Where do you think people go? Where do you think people get? I'll use the word distracted when they're going down visualizing load management, and you know, try and get a little bit too complicated instead of keeping things relatively simple. Because this is, in my opinion, an example of, you know, the right things put in the right places and just laid out in a simple way. It's nothing too over the top, nothing too fancy. Where do you think people get distracted when they're trying to visualize their load management and understand it?
For sure. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think as part of my process in understanding, say, the audience, I think that's where you need to, before you even, you've obviously got an end goal in mind in terms of displaying your workload data. But I think understanding your audience and having those genuine conversations with your coaches, if that's who it's intended for, with your head strength and conditioning coach, your physical therapists, athletic trainers, and really understanding their perspective on this. I think it's quite easy to go off your own biases and just say, yep, this is how it needs to look, or this is the best way to look, but that just might not make sense to your audience. So sitting with them and I think through my mentors over the time, like really just having those conversations to understand their ideas, their philosophies in this space, and then working with those to make sure it's in a format that they're going to understand, uses terminology and language that they'll understand.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. To those in the chat or the Q&A, please feel free to jump in. We can open up your mic. So if you prefer to speak, we can get you in on the mic. As I'm waiting for questions there, I will just do a little bit of housekeeping. Next week, we're looking at session plans. So writing out session plans and doing a little bit of predictive loading through the prescription of those session plans. So that almost ties in a little bit to the load management piece that we're doing today. And we'll look to bring on Marcus as well in the next couple of weeks, particularly for those in the pro sporting world, as we begin to look back at ramping up the loads again, and get back to play. We're going to start getting a bit of a roundtable, a bit of a panel happening here, and leveraging Marcus's experience to discuss best practices when bringing those people back into either an Olympic cycle or a pro sport environment. Got a question here come in. The question is just asking if they can ask a little bit more about the Z score. It is a calculation by comparing the data of that session. Is it possible to define with what to compare to? For example, compare with the athletes, compare athletes with same age, gender, etc.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of how we approach this, and a lot of the organizations we work with probably agree, is we use that load information on an individual basis. So we're actually comparing that athlete compared to their average output or average load in a similar session, whether that's training or competition. We'll configure the system to look at the individual versus themselves. We're obviously, there's the awareness that, yeah, maybe within positional groups, we do want to see similar outputs, but in terms of some of the internal loads, especially in terms of how their body's responding, that's on a very individual basis. So we compare to the individual's average.
Okay, just waiting to see now the questions flow through. I'll give people time to type and just say that again, we've got that survey coming out. Please feel free to fill that out. Please feel free to put any topics that you want to see in the next couple of webinars. If you're on YouTube, please comment below and get the conversation started. If you have any questions there, or if you or if you have any topics that you would like to suggest. If you want to get Marcus on email to discuss anything regarding this, it's marcus.colby@fusionsport.com, and mine is just james@fusionsport.com. I can see no other questions coming through, so from Marcus, myself, thank you very much for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.